Good afternoon and welcome to the June 9th joint work session of the Arlington County Board and Arlington Public Schools. We have a discussion this afternoon regarding facilities and our capital investments. And I'll start off. I'm the County Board Chair, Matt DeFranti. I'll introduce County Board colleagues and then send it over to Monique O'Grady, our School Board Chair, to introduce just for those few who might not know. So if you can wave colleagues on the county board when we have board member Takis Karantonis with a little bit of sleep after a long day yesterday, board member Libby Garvey, Vice Chair Katie Crystal, and board member Christian Dorsey. And we'll send it now over to you, Monique, to just introduce, and we'll have a couple opening remarks and we'll get right to it.
Thank you, Chair DeFranti. We do appreciate it. We're so happy to be here with our county board colleagues and friends. I would like to introduce my esteemed colleagues as well. And let's start off with our chair, Dr. Barbara Cannonen, and also longtime member Reed Goldstein, and my newer colleagues, Christina Diaz-Torres, and last and definitely not least, Mr. David Priddy. Thank you, Mr. DeFranti.
Thank you, Chair O'Grady. Monique, I appreciate it. So I will just say, as I thought through and we thought through preparation for this afternoon, we are all adjusting to more and more environments without masks over the last couple of days for those who are vaccinated. But the after effects of COVID are still with us from a capital planning perspective. So the capital improvement plans that we are in the process of drafting and that we're making the board, each respective board, and then eventually one capital improvement plan, typically last for 10 years. This year, we're doing 3 years as our time horizon. And we're really trying to, there are a lot of assumptions and there's still some significant economic hangover from the challenges of COVID. And so even as we're eager to move forward, I think it behooves all of us just to keep remembering that the economic forecasts are still based on the after effects of COVID. And certainly it's been a lot of adjustments, so many adjustments necessary on our school side as well. So that's my 2 cents as we, I think it's just important as we talk through these issues that there's going to be, even though we're transitioning and recovering out of COVID, there's still some economic impacts that affect our capital planning. And with that, I'll send it over to you, Chair O'Grady, for opening remarks. And then I think we'll start with a sort of overview of your capital improvement plan and eventually come back to our county manager's plan. Over to you.
Okay, thanks so much, Mr. DeFranti. And I just want to start by thanking everyone who worked on this meeting. Our staffs, I know, have worked very hard to put together our each of our CIPs, and we're excited to share with you the school board's proposed CIP right now, which takes a look at long-term planning, also takes a look at our buildings and their needs when it comes to infrastructure, and our system as it continues to change, and making sure that we are in front of the needs of our students and our buildings needs as well. I think this will give you an opportunity to see what we are planning for our youngest Arlingtonians and our almost adult Arlingtonians as well. So we're happy to be able to share that with you today. And I'm grateful to have great staff who's going to help us present our proposed CIP.
All right, thank you, Chair O'Grady. And if someone can bring up the slideshow for us, that would be great. But while that's being brought up, during today's joint work session, staff will be joining me to present the school board's 22-24 CIP, and we'll be providing a brief overview of our proposed projects that are included in the CIP today. The focus is going to be on how our proposals really positively benefit our students, but also the overall Arlington community. As we all know, our school division is still continuing to grow, and so part of our work in the CIP is that we are planning for the increased student enrollment in the years to come. In the short-term future, there will be a need to accommodate additional secondary seats that we've seen, especially as our population of Arlington residents continues to increase. And so as we think about our plan for the instructional needs of our students, by proposing construction of new school facilities, it's also important, though, that we look at our necessary infrastructure improvements that support the educational experiences of our students in our current buildings. And so some of those that you'll see in our plan are kitchen additions, which are going to allow us to prepare fresh meals for our students that are healthy and nutritious. You'll also see some overview of our upgraded entrance vestibules for security and safety of our students and our staff. You'll also see some HVAC upgrades to improve the health and safety of our students and staff by improving air filtration and circulation. And also, as we plan for our students, we're also very mindful about how we plan for our community's needs overall, because our facilities, while they're used heavily, obviously, during the day for our students, we want to make sure that we're also providing facilities during non-school hours that can be community hubs or gathering spots or opportunities for all of our county to benefit. And so that is what you'll see today in some of the proposals that we have. As we think about our proposed 22-24 CIP, it is resuming some of the work that was expected to be part of the 21-30 CIP, especially after the one-year CIP from last year that we had due to COVID-19. And as we're returning slowly back to being more in our normal operations, we are now also moving to returning to our normal planning process through the CIP. You'll see the November 2021 school board referendum includes funding for projects that improve school operations, teaching and learning, helping to maintain our existing facilities, preparing for middle and high school growth, and also the expanded that we need to think about for graduation pathways for our students. And so that's what we hope to share today. And we're at the end, we're happy to answer any questions. And so with me to help me do that is Assistant Superintendent of Finance and Budget, Leslie Peterson, our Director of Facilities and Operations, Kathy Lynn, our Director of Design and Construction, Jeff Chambers, Assistant Director of Design and Construction, Ben Burgeon, and our Executive Director of Planning and Evaluation, Lisa Stengel. So they're going to be here to help with share some of the information in our CIP, and I thank them for all their hard work. And I'd now like to turn it over to our Assistant Superintendent of Finance and Budget, Leslie Peterson. Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you, Dr. Dudan. It is my pleasure to be here today. I am providing here in this slide an overview of the funding for all of the projects in this 3-year CIP, plus a look at the 3 out years just to show projects and their completion throughout the next 6 years. The first part of the slide shows the enrollment capacity projects. We really only have one. That is the Career Center Campus project. It is shown at $184.7 million. I want to emphasize that this is just a placeholder that is based on the amount that was in the FY19 to 28 CIP. We are still awaiting numbers on the Career Center based on the new concept that has been presented to the school board. The other part of the slide shows improvements that we would like to make in our existing facilities in order to maintain those and keep those up to the best of our ability. And you'll get a lot more detail on these projects from my colleagues as we go through this presentation. I did want to point out that the FY21 referendum is quite small at $23 million. And that is because we've used a strategy here to use previous bond funding and capital reserves to help mitigate the need for new bond funding going forward. That said, in FY22, we would have a large bond referendum at $133 million because the major portion of the Career Center project would be included in that referendum. For the first 3 years of the CIP, or 3-year time horizon, we are fine with our debt service ratio if you look at the box at the bottom right of the slide. In the out years, 25, 26, and 27, we do exceed our 10% debt limit in those 3 years. And so this would be something that we would have to work on with the county. We've done this previously in our 17 to 26 CIP. We had that same issue in FY21 and FY22, but by the time the next CIP rolled around, that was no longer needed as things had changed, revenue had increased, and so it would be something for the out years and something that would likely not come to fruition, but if needed, we would need this county's support on that. Next slide, please. Thank you. This chart outlines the completion timelines for each of the projects. The Career Center campus project would be done in 4 phases, with the first phase being, I won't go into the phases, you'll get that later, but 4 phases that will start now in the next year and then be completed finally in August of 2028. We have major infrastructure projects slated for each year. Those include our HVAC replacements and upgrades, as well as roofing and windows and building envelope work. The smaller projects that we're looking at for air quality and air filtration and ventilation would happen over the next 3 years in a much shorter timeline. We have kitchen renovations at 8 schools that would take place in a few of the out years, beginning with completion in August of 23 and then continuing through August of 26, with entry vestibules taking place around the same time for those 10 schools. The Heights project would be completed in the fall of 23, and our synthetic field turf replacements would take place over the summer and be completed in time for school, as shown on the chart. And now I'd like to turn it over to Ms. Kathy Lynn, our Director of Facilities and Operations.
Thank you, Ms. Peterson. So for the major infrastructure projects in our proposed CIP, we're going to continue the same approach that we've done in the past to really focus on the current pace of our comprehensive system replacement, really focusing on all the systems at the end of their useful life and really working on replacing everything in whole. We've been very fortunate during this year to have a really good study on a lot of our facilities with regards to improved ventilation, increased ventilation, and improved filtration. So that has informed our approach in terms of prioritizing our HVAC infrastructure projects. We do appreciate Ms. McSweeney, the chair of the JFACs, and her recommendations as we do our infrastructure, as we focus on our roofing upgrades and re-roofing projects to really try to make them solar ready, as we have done in the previous times. And then we also have electrical as part of our major infrastructure projects. Next slide, please. As Ms. Peterson says, we have worked closely with the county and aligned our synthetic turf replacements with their CIP schedule, because we work together in terms of shared funding. So that is what you see here, is when these fields need to be replaced at their end of the useful life. And so that's what we have scheduled. And then next, we'd like to present Mr. Ben Bergen, who will present some of the other CIP projects.
All right, thank you, Ms. Lynn. I'll start with the kitchen projects. And as Ms. Peterson mentioned, the kitchen, or the CIP, includes renovation of kitchen and serving areas at 8 locations, and is a rather urgent needed investment in our existing facilities. A couple of comments on the existing kitchens. They were designed in a time that is vastly different than today's food service operations and food service needs. A couple of examples of that is to improve the quality of meals served. APS shifted from preparing meals at a central kitchen to preparing meals on site. And that had a consequence of needing additional food prep and storage area. Also, the Hunger-Free Food Act of 2010 required serving more fruits, vegetables, and grains, which again put a higher demand on prep areas than what currently exists. And in many cases, kitchens are serving 40 to 50% more students than they were originally designed to. This occurs particularly at sites that have received building additions and or relocatable classrooms. And many of these spaces have exceeded their useful life, as well as the equipment within them, and need to be brought up to current Department of Health requirements. And additionally, these existing kitchens have 1 serving line, and with the renovations, we'll create 2 serving lines. And that's an important factor, because some school administrators have actually cited issues with the existing kitchen serving areas as a challenge, and actually putting restrictions on the instructional schedule, because they have to plan around serving all the students in allotted lunch periods. Next slide. To give this a bit of a visual dimension, on the left illustrates many of the challenges facing these existing facilities, such as the lack of adequate prep space, only having one oven, and in this case, some of the equipment on wheels actually has to be moved to different parts of the kitchen throughout the day so that it can function properly. And contrast that with the image on the right, which is a recently completed kitchen, showing an enormous difference in the food prep, storage, and equipment space. Next slide. A couple of comments on the security entry vestibules. Ms. Peterson mentioned that these will occur at 10 locations. Overall, in the scheme of things, a fairly modest capital investment that will have a tremendous benefit by ensuring that all visitors complete required screening in the main office prior to being admitted further into the school. And when complete, all facilities will have a consistent, predictable, and safe access to the main entrance. Next slide. At the Heights site, what is proposed will complete a project as originally intended, and that completion period was delayed a bit because of the siting of the temporary fire station at that location. Ms. Peterson mentioned the proposed completion date is August of 2023, which is 4 years after the facility opened in 2019. A couple of comments on just the existing conditions. Virtually all of the items installed from the building to 18th Street are temporary, and that was done knowing that a final condition would be installed once the temporary fire station was removed. So we're at a point where the temporary fire station will be removed a little bit later this year, so we can proceed with finishing out that project. And the proposed project is very similar to the concept studied during the initial design phase and incorporates several operational challenges the site has faced since its opening. Primary features of the project include an inviting and universally accessible path to the main entrance adjacent to the Shriver Program Administrative Area, covered off-street area for pickup, student pickup and drop-off, convenient handicap parking for staff and visitors immediately adjacent to a building entrance, and the largest possible synthetic turf field for school and community use. There are a couple of other key things the project provides, including required stormwater management infrastructure, enhanced covered bicycle facilities for students and visitors, secure bicycle facilities for staff, and the only on-site parking spaces within the exclusive control and operation of APS. And a distinction here is that this is the only APS facility that has no on-site transportation facilities for handicap parking, short-term parking, or infrastructure to support parent pickup and drop-off. This project will add all of those features and eliminate many of the barriers that currently exist in accessing the building. Next slide. So these two images compare the existing condition, which, as I mentioned, is always planned to be a temporary condition, to the proposed design, and underscores a dramatic improvement. The image on the left shows the route users must take to get from the public sidewalk on Quinn Street to the main entrance next to the Shriver Program Administrative Area. This journey includes heading into a pit of sorts, traversing either several stairs or several switchback ramps. And if you contrast that experience to what will be available when the project is completed, the image on the right shows the proposed barrier-free covered entrance, where users of any ability will be able to access the building via a gently sloped walkway from the public sidewalk. And these improvements will create a welcoming entrance, and one that is reflective of the APS core values of equity and inclusivity. And that's it for me, and I'll transition now to Mr. Jeff Chambers, Director of Design and Construction.
Thank you, Mr. Bergen. I'm going to be discussing the Career Center campus proposal to start with. Last year's CIP was supposed to include plans for the redevelopment of the Arlington Career Center. However, that project came in significantly over the budget for the project. Recently, the staff has provided a new proposal that is still taking shape. The costs will be discussed on June 14th at work session number 4. We believe that the new plan will better address many instructional goals, including providing appropriate space or spaces for the Arlington Career Center students, expanding the Arlington Tech pathways for middle school students and more high school students. It will almost double the number of career and technical courses available for students from the other APS schools. And by repurposing the existing Arlington Career Center building for pre-K to grade 8 Montessori, it will free up classroom space at some of our other schools with growing enrollment, and has the potential to address some of our pre-K inclusion needs. This proposal uses our vision for instruction informing the construction proposals. Initial work on APS's pre-K adult instructional programs and pathways helped us shape the plan for the Career Center campus. Next slide, please. As Ms. Peterson noted, that we were looking at doing this work in 4 phases. The first phase would be to relocate the Arlington Community High School to a purpose-built space off-site. The site for the Arlington Community High School is to be determined, and we will be considering availability, accessibility, and transportation for students in that site choice. Phase 2 would be to construct a new Career Center building on that site based on the educational specifications. This new construction will include preparing the site with temporary parking, moving relocatable classrooms as needed, and demolishing the Fenwick building. The goal is to better maximize the use of the site than the previous concept that had been developed. Phase 3 would include renovating the existing Career Center building to support the grades pre-K through 8 Montessori Public School of Arlington. And as part of this, it would include the demolition of the high bay shop areas, upgrading the building and systems, providing a gym, play areas, and parking structure, which would serve the entire site, the parking structure that is. The planned 420 parking spaces that we're using in this study at this point is the same number that was established during the 2020 BLPC PFRC concept design, and of course would be adjusted for the actual site capacity and finalized with a future use permit process. Phase 4 would redevelop the north end of the site. The type and number of fields that would be provided, as well as the other types of green spaces, will be defined as part of the design process. Next slide, please. We believe that this proposal that we're working on will provide community benefits, both on the site as well as in the building, for use during non-school hours. I do want to also say community engagement will continue. What we are proposing aligns with the previous work that was done in concert with the community, and community engagement will continue to build on past work as we would move forward. Next slide, please. For the next year's CIP, direction has already been provided to establish a prioritized long-term plan that would improve all of our existing facilities. I also wanted to note that the Career Center proposal that we're working on does provide cost avoidance by removing the existing Arlington Community High School and Montessori Public School of Arlington buildings, which would otherwise require significant investment to modernize. For instance, the recent HVAC study and maintenance department priority list have identified MPSA as a high priority for improvement, with at least 14 million needed just for the HVAC work alone. At this point, I will transition to Ms. Elisa Stengel, Executive Director of Planning and Evaluation.
So before we wrap up the presentation, we wanted to put some items on your radar for long-term collaboration as we move forward after the CIP is adopted. We really appreciate being included in the county's planning processes and being a partner with your staff. We want to ensure that when we leave the Pentagon City Planning Study, that we do map out a place for a school as well as Lee Highway. I think as we're looking at the development in the 22202 zip code, we know that we're going to need capacity for students there with the amount of housing that is being added. We'd like to be included as an element in the county's comprehensive plan, as soon as we possibly can, aiming for January 2024, knowing that we need to do some work to our Aps Staff to get there. But taking your leadership on how we align our planning documents to fit within your comprehensive plan, because ideally we'd come back to a Pentagon City planning process and schools would be included like all of the other elements that are in your comprehensive plan. We'd like to consider changes to the use permit process, which only applies to schools, and really focusing on anything that adds time to our school construction projects that's sort of out of the norm. And then we'd also like to put on the radar, continue to make improvements along Carlin Springs Road. If we ever get to the point where growth requires that we use that site for building, we know that you need a 10-year timeline, and we often may not have that much time to prepare. And we are hearing a lot right now as we talk about the Career Center. Why aren't we building at Kenmore? And it goes back to the transportation recommendations that we had when we worked with the leadership team from Arlington County on selecting a high school site. And with that, I'll turn it back to Chair O'Grady.
Thank you very much. So you can see here, this is our proposed CIP. And all of the projects that are included in it, as well as the timeline for funding, the corresponding bond dollars, and you will note, as Ms. Peterson talked about, how this project would move forward. And I do have another slide, but I'm going to wait and turn it back to Mr. DiFerente so he is able to start his presentation. And then I'll come back for some final comments before the school board starts its questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair O'Grady. And let's see if I got this order right. Well choreographed, Dr. Duran, Ms. Peterson, Ms. Lynn, Mr. Bergen, Mr. Chambers, Ms. Stengel, and then back to the chair. Thank you for the presentation. I thought I'd take a little risk here and see if I have one question that I would term for clarification. That's actually might be probably is for our manager regarding the presentation, and if colleagues on the county board have questions to try and clarify so we understand the school board's presentation to this point. The question really is about financial assumptions and the footnotes that are in those two the spreadsheets. Mr. Manager, is it right that those are based on one of the issues out there is the bond 10% practice that we have had, longstanding practice of the community. And the question from me is, as we look to the out years, fiscal 25, 6, and 7, are those assumptions based on the dip in overall budgets or not? Are we likely to see a recovery as we consider next year relative to the 10% or not?
Thank you, Mr. DiFerente. I think that Ms. Peterson actually spoke to this in part of her presentation, which is that, with the CIP, you have in front of you 1 year where you have firm knowledge and the facts, and then assumptions in future years. And those assumptions, as you go through and you redo your CIP, get washed away. We've always been in the fortunate situation, and I expect we will be again, where the revenue assumptions and the underlying criteria and analysis tends to improve over time. So I guess that's a long way of answering your question. Yeah, the numbers there right now are right for the moment, but they soon will be wrong.
Thank you. Well navigated and balanced as to leaving yourself room, and also our past history of slight increases. I guess I'd open it up to colleagues on the county board to see if you had any questions for clarification at this stage. We will come back, of course, to after we present to a more extended discussion, but wanted to open for colleagues to see if there are any questions. I don't currently see, I see everyone, but see no hands. And so I think we're good to go next to our county manager's presentation of the proposed CIP. And you know, we are still in the process. The school board has a proposed CIP that's working through, but we're still a little earlier in the process. But I'll send it to the manager for our presentation as to the county board's draft and the county manager's draft, I should say.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the county board, and Madam Chair, members of the school board. I'm going to turn the reins over to Maria Meredith, who has promised me that she will talk a little more slowly than she did when she made this presentation previously, but to have a brief presentation on our CIP, I think assisted by Mr. Greg Emanuel. So over to you, Maria.
Okay. It is 4 p.m. rather than 11 p.m., Mark. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Why don't you move to the next slide, Richard? Thank you. So as you may recall, last year we adopted a one-year CIP given the true uncertainty of the impact of the pandemic. And this year, as we're still recovering, as Mr. DiFerenti noted earlier, we're again pivoting to modify our traditional process of a 10-year CIP and proposing a 3-year CIP we just proposed a 3-year CIP last month. It's our intent that next year we will return to a traditional 10-year plan. While the CIP the manager proposed last month is constrained as a result of the pandemic, it does include continued investments across all the areas on this slide, from Metro, which is one of our largest annual investments, to our parks, related amenities, to technology, infrastructure, stormwater, and maintaining the wide array of assets we have in a state of good repair and protecting them from premature failure. This slide shows some of the guiding principles which we used in the development of the CIP. While our bonds and CRP are constrained by our financial policies with a ceiling of debt service as a percent of general fund expenditures not exceeding 10% that you just discussed, this year we looked especially closely at the annual growth of debt service, minimizing that growth on the operating budget while we still have some COVID-related economic uncertainty, or the economic hangover, as Mr. DiFerenti said. While the investments in this CIP are more modest than in some years, we're still paying debt service from some large recent capital projects such as Lover Run, Longbridge Park, and Jenny Dean Park. As the manager talked about during the operating budget process, this CIP too provides a bridge to next year when we hope to have more economic certainty and again can focus on the 10-year plan. The proposed CIP prioritizes projects that address failing end-of-life infrastructure with continued focus on state of good repair and some of our significant bridges, trails, technology systems, roofs, and more. The CIP meets our legal and regulatory obligations, most obviously funding Metro, and it focuses on investments as part of planning processes such as Crystal City. It also includes investments in technology and facilities with consideration of our new work environment post-pandemic and provides some flexibility there. This slide talks about how we pay for the CIP. The county's 3-year, $1.25 billion proposed CIP is funded by a wide array of sources, as you can see on this slide, ranging from general obligation bonds to PAYGO to state and federal funding and other taxes. It's important to note that the majority of these sources are legally restricted in nature. For example, the commercial and industrial tax is legally dedicated for transportation, and the sanitary tax is restricted for stormwater. Bonds are not allowed to be used for operating expenses, and bonds designated for parks, as an example, park bonds must be used for parks. So this money isn't fungible. This slide talks to our 2021 proposed bond referenda. For the county, the CIP is recommending $62.535 million to be considered for the 21 bond referenda in November. While it isn't typical to have an off-year referenda, the request is largely intended to cover the next year of mandatory funding needs for Metro, paving, and some critical preventative maintenance projects in parks and facilities, and a portion of some of our 23 projects. As this slide shows, our largest category at more than 50% is for Metro transportation. With Metro, it's a legal obligation along with our regional partners and our continued investment also in paving. It also includes some modest investments, as you can see, in parks and about $17 million largely focused on facilities. And then there will be a school piece that you talked about earlier. Regional commitments. As we showed on the opening slide, the capital funds a variety of programs. Beginning with our regional commitments, we fund Metro through both local support and state funding. And that's over $90 million in this 3-year CIP. This includes local bond funding support of just about $20 million each year for 22, 23, and 24. Stormwater has been a particular focus in our capital plan, especially as a result of the changing weather patterns, which has put some significant attention on our aging infrastructure. Over the next 3 years, additional investments of about $96 million are proposed for a variety of projects listed here. Some of these include the Ballston Pond watershed, Cardinal Elementary School, stormwater detention, and some projects in the Spout Run watershed. In the water sewer area, we continue to implement projects in the Solids Master Plan, provide the county's share of funding capital improvements to the Washington Aqueduct, the county's wholesale water supplier, and a variety of underground infrastructure supporting our water and sewer distribution. In terms of transportation in the general government area, the proposed CIP has over $700 million in transportation and street safety projects, excluding Metro. We continue to invest in the paving program with a combination of bond and PAYGO funding. Though we're proposing a slightly lower bond funding level this CIP cycle for paving, it's projected that we'll still maintain our targeted PCI levels of 75 to 80, which is an important factor. With a mix of local, federal, and state funding, as I stated earlier, we're proposing some significant investments in bridge replacement and renovations, namely the replacement of the West Glebe Road and Mount Vernon bridges, along with some other bridge maintenance. And we continue our investment along the Columbia Pike corridor and are focusing countywide resources to the county's Vision Zero street safety program. To highlight a couple more transportation projects on this slide, we're proposing funding for the county's ART bus operations and maintenance facility and 2 new Metro station entrances, one at the east end of Crystal City Metro Rail and the other at the intersection of Fairfax Drive and Vermont Street for the west entrance of Ballston. We didn't list out all of the projects here. I thought I would give you some highlights on these 4 areas of investment across the county. In Parks and Recreation capital area, we continue our investments in parks maintenance capital and master planning, in replacements and expansion of fields in the synthetic turf program, which I'm going to talk about a little later, and our trail and bridge modernization program. Some specific projects include planning and design funding for the Arlington Boathouse, a program which has been talked about and discussed for quite a long time. It also includes replacement of the Bluemont tennis and picnic areas, which include replacing the courts, court lighting, restrooms, and other amenities, and the maintenance of other park facilities. For the community conservation, which is about $23 million, we're proposing additional bond funding of $6 million and using existing balances and previously approved bond funding to support the current projects. For this 3-year CIP, we've focused on the most critical investments in our existing infrastructure. Our aging, then I'm talking about the public government facilities line now, about $37 million. Our aging courts police building, which is almost 30 years old, needs a variety of technology and space upgrades. There's also a need to relocate some staff from other county buildings into the courthouse complex. We also have a number of county buildings which need updates and replacements to electrical, mechanical, and HVAC systems. And when we are replacing roofs, like the planned replacement of the Equipment Bureau, we're planning for solar or solar readiness. And then lastly, we continue to invest in our technology, about $69 million in our technology infrastructure. With the workforce and public interaction changes post-pandemic, we are proposing a variety of conference and AV investments, audiovisual and other county facilities outside our building here at the Bosman Center to support our commissions and public as they interact with the county government. We have some investments in public safety equipment, which is essential. essential equipment. And as we've discussed in previous budgets, we are replacing several systems over the next few years, most notably the county's financial and human resource system. This next slide is about our adherence to debt policies. That 10% ceiling for our debt service as a percent of general government expenditures is a best practice for maintaining our AAA bond rating with the major rating agencies, which was actually confirmed. Our AAA rating was confirmed 2 weeks ago, I'm happy to say. As I said earlier, our focus was more on constraining our debt service growth in the development of this CIP and the impact on the operating budget. As we transition back to that 10-year plan, the out-year assumptions on debt and affordability will be modified accordingly and adhering to that 10% limit and other financial policies that we have. I'd like to highlight all the work that's currently underway, or at least a portion of it. We have a number of projects across all investment areas that are continuing. This slide and the next one show some of the highlights of the many projects the county has in progress. I won't read them all to you, but you can see that in the facilities area, the permanent fire station 8 will begin construction this fall. Parks is completing the Longbridge Aquatics and Fitness facility in the next few months, and Jenny Dean Park this fall. There are a number of stormwater projects underway as the board approves significant investments in this area in the last CIP, including that first phase at Cardinal School, among others. In transportation, construction is well underway on Columbia Pike and on Ballston multimodal improvements, and work has just begun on the West Glebe Road Bridge and the Pentagon City Second Elevator. There's many neighborhood conservation projects in progress and numerous utility projects underway, including that Spout Run sanitary sewer relining. You know, in most years, we do in-person collection of feedback from the community. Obviously, we weren't able to do that again this year, so we used an online survey tool. We had about 700 participants who provided us their thoughts on what our priorities should be. You can see there's strong interest here in our parks, water and wastewater systems, and transit top the list. I wanted to highlight some of the work being done on synthetic turf in the CIP. There is $3.8 million for shared school community fields. I'm getting some back, maybe it's stopped now. And community fields, which includes about the $1.6 million contribution from schools. We have about 3 upcoming fields for replacement in the schools area: Wakefield in 23, Washington Liberty High School, and Williamsburg Middle School in 24. We're focusing on trying on-cycle replacement of existing fields and keeping in mind ongoing costs of field maintenance and field conversion versus space for new schools. I'm going to turn over the next slide regarding our State Center optimization plan. Director of Environmental Services.
Thanks, Ms. Meredith. So over the last couple of years, Arlington County and APS staff have worked jointly together to determine a unified approach to optimize the future of our many critical support functions at the Trade Center. We have kind of a shared destiny there. The current situation has many operational and safety challenges, particularly for pedestrians. And the APS bus operation only runs today with the Barcroft Garage as a place to shuttle drivers and attendants from, because there's insufficient on-site parking. And of course, the APS facilities, White Fleet, is also dispersed off-site away from their shops and support space. So we challenge ourselves and the consultant to find a way to retain the many existing uses on site, from the 200 school buses to the Fire Training Academy, the Earth Product Yard, and many other functions. However, no matter how many iterations and options we looked at, we did not find a clear solution that was both feasible from a sequencing standpoint and affordable. So in short, something has to give, particularly because we are already operating beyond the capacity of the site. So we thought that our logical next steps were to consider relocation of some functions to create openings and flexibility for going vertical. So initially that points us to current county functions like the police impound lot and transportation engineering operations, since the degree of interdependency on site with other functions is not as great for those as it is for others that should remain. We also came to the realization that we may need to look at other options and service models for bus parking. The options we considered were all surface parking and we may need to go vertical. At the same time, we want to look at infrastructure for electrification of the bus fleet because we think that's where we're going over time. And of course, maybe look at a different service model. So with a head nod from both boards, we would then like to share these results with the community and then get underway with the next joint study effort that's focused on buses and other electrification for other vehicles in the future so that it can inform future CIPs for both the county and APS.
And our last slide is just an update on our timeline. And I realize that we didn't change the date of our government facilities is no longer June 8th. It's a little further out. But that's, we have a few more work sessions coming up. We have a public hearing on the 29th. And then we'll have board adoption of the next CIP on July 17th. That covers our presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Meredith and Mr. Emanuel. Mr. Manager, I trust you don't have any concluding comments, so we will, unless you pop up, and we will go to Chair O'Grady for any clarifying questions that she or the school board may have on the county manager's presentation.
Thank you very much, Chair DeFerente. And I want to also thank Ms. Meredith and Mr. Emanuel and Manager Schwartz for giving us that presentation. You guys have a lot going on, everything from safety to infrastructure to transportation to recreation, looking at your facilities and technology. And we so appreciate getting the opportunity to hear from you. Let's find out from my colleagues if there are any clarifying questions. Colleagues, if that is the case, please indicate with a raised hand, and we'll start with our Vice Chair, Dr. Cannonen. Dr. Cannonen.
Hi, thank you very much. Great presentation. And my clarifying question is going to be the harder question. I'm going to ask an easy question about the economy later. So it's about the Williamsburg field. And I know that the issue of lights has come up in the past. And if I recall correctly, lights were not installed at that field, but you all adopted kind of a decision-making framework to think about how to optimize the use of fields and where lights should go. Could you share, are you coming back to that then and considering the question of whether lights should be installed at that field? It's a joint project. So what are the next steps in terms of thinking about that or not?
I think that's one for the manager, but I know there was a time frame for reconsideration, is my recollection. I could not tell you that time frame off the top of my head. I think you're on mute.
Mr. DeFerente, you and I have that in common because I can't tell you the time frame off the top of my head. So I'm going to ask either Ms. Cowan or Ms. Rudolph, who are here, who think about these things more often than I do, to see if they can shed some light on this.
Ms. Rudolph.
Sure, great. Thank you, Mr. Manager. We always know you have a pun with you. There are many steps that came out of the Public Spaces Master Plan that you're correct that we are going to look at lighting across the board. We have some hindrances for moving forward, which is that there is some zoning issues that need to be worked through first. We are working with CPHD, Community Housing and Planning, to look at when we can look at the zoning so that we can ensure that we have the proper light heights. That was always the issue when we started doing Williamsburg, was the light heights. So our first step is to look at the zoning and make sure we have the right zoning in place, to then look at the evaluation framework to see where we should be putting lights. We hope that this could sync up in time for the replacement of Williamsburg fields. We are currently working with CPHD on the lighting issues, and with our Public Spaces Master Plan Implementation Committee, we're actually talking about some of those zoning changes next week at our next meeting. So we'll have to report back on that timeline, but you are right. That was a conversation, was that, all right, we're going to look at the next time we do the field, and we're just have to understand, are we able to do it with the timing and have everything sync up? So more soon on it, I guess, is my answer.
Great. Yes, perfect. Thank you. Thank you.
Sure. And there may have been another quick clarifying question. Sorry, go ahead, Chair O'Grady.
I was just going to ask the same thing, Mr. DeFerente. Any additional clarifying questions from my colleagues on the school board? I am not seeing anyone virtually raising their hand, Mr. DeFerente. Under that situation, is it possible for me to go back to that one slide and then open up the program for questions from the school board on either anything in our presentation or your presentation?
Sounds good.
Perfect. So I just want to share for you some things that we're thinking about around collaboration, because as you know, I always like to talk about how important it is for us to work together to advance programs and projects that benefit our community, from our young learners to our families who don't have any children in the system. And when we go back to our proposed CIP, we are hoping that we can continue to work with you as we have in the past along joint funding. And we've seen that funding in terms in the past of ensuring that we have synthetic fields, as was presented in both of our presentations. And those synthetic fields that we're looking at for the future include a field at the Heights and also the Career Center campus. And we do take very seriously the understanding that while we have our school buildings for school time, outside of that time, we understand that they are an amenity and benefit for our communities. And the same goes for our fields, of course, as well. So we're looking forward to continued collaboration and partnership with you for our field work. In addition to that, we talked a little bit about the importance of the bonding capacity. And for this particular proposed CIP, we would want to work with you for a few out years where it looks like the bonding capacity on our side would go beyond the 10% cap. And in the past, I believe we've spoken about the ability to be able to kind of bob and weave a little bit and maybe perhaps borrow a little bit of the capacity that you might have that you may not need so that we can advance our projects. So you might have noticed in the spreadsheet that there are just a few years where we would need a little bit more bonding capacity than we would normally require in order to advance the proposed CIP. In addition to that, one of the major first steps we need to take in order to move the proposed Career Center project forward is to move the Arlington Community High School and find it a long-term home that is accessible to the students who benefit greatly from that important program. And we know that you have your finger on the pulse of new opportunities and locations that are available, and we'd like to work jointly with you to help identify a new home so we can provide an accessible space for those students that they can expect to be at their opportunity for the long term. And as we have worked in the past, we'd like to continue to collaborate with you on transportation. In the past, we have been working to figure out how to access the art buses for some of our students. And we want to continue to talk about transportation collaboration when it comes to the Career Center and the future Arlington Community High School sites. As the Career Center is on the pike, there is robust transportation opportunities, and we'd like to continue to collaborate with you on ways to make that accessible and valuable to our students who will use the Career Center site, and to ensure that wherever the new location is for Arlington Community High School, that students have access to good, reliable, and easy transportation to access it. And then lastly, as the county continues to look at the Columbia Pike Library, we'd like to continue our collaboration on that library. And as many people know, we work together to ensure that we could renovate the first floor of the library, and while making the second floor available to our students during the daytime. And that has been an excellent collaboration. As the county continues to think about the library, we'd like to be kept abreast of any plans you may have for the library's future as we continue to make some steps towards changing the Career Center site. And those are the things we want to share with you. And now I'd like to turn to my colleagues, and I'd ask them to raise their virtual hand so I can call on them to make comments or ask questions about either of the presentation. Colleagues. At this point, I'm not seeing any virtual hands raised, but now I do. Dr. Cannon, please, you are recognized.
Well, I was trying to wait for others and maybe everyone was waiting. So this was my other question, and I just wanted to get back to you all. I noticed on your slide 3, as you talked about your economic assumptions, you referred to a constrained approach, conservative projected growth, and of course my favorite description was Mr. DeFerrante's reference to an economic hangover, the COVID economic hangover. As Ms. O'Grady just shared, we are going above our side, our 10% debt capacity going forward. And I heard what the manager said as well. He's being very careful to, not really project not being careful to not be overconfident about our potential in terms of the economy. But I just wonder if you all could expand a little bit on that, especially since you are going to have to approve our CIP, and you do see that we are kind of leaning into an expectation that the economy might improve in the next several years. And at the very least, as we think about approving our CIP, we do need to know that you at least don't think we're on another planet. So if someone, whether the manager, Mr. DeFerranti, if someone could just share a little bit more about at least your thoughts about where we are in terms of, we're not leaning heavily, but we are kind of expecting the economy to improve. And if you could share a little bit more about what you really think.
I see Mr. Stevenson has popped up, which is great because I am no PhD economist like you. And so I think the one thought I have is that may help, and then go to Mr. Stevenson, is that I do know there are other issues that feel shorter term, like the community high school piece that I'm also concerned about. But let's get the projection from Mr. Stevenson.
Well, I'm no doctoral economic analyst either, but let me tell you what we're doing and how we see things sort of playing out over the next 12 months as we prepare to do get back to our 10-year CIP this time next year. So on the tax revenue front, there's a lot of anecdotal information out there right now as things are starting to improve. And we've assumed some of those assumptions in the 22 adopted operating budget, that there will be some tax growth. We continue anecdotally to see the residential side of real estate assessments continues to be strong. What we don't know yet is the commercial component. That will play itself out a little bit more over the next several months as the buildings are providing information to us, the assessment office, and there are appeals, and finally in the fall when that information is starts to come out more clearly for us as it relates to the budget. Real estate is a huge component of our tax support, and so it is driven by what's going to go on the commercial sector. As we've talked about in the past, commercial buildings for the most part on the office building side are multi-lease or multi-tenant and multi-year. And so, we continue to be concerned about, what's going to happen over the next several years as it relates to commercial. I just think it's probably going to be somewhat of a drag on the overall tax growth, right? I'm not telling you anything that you probably already don't know. We were happy to see how our business license taxes came in this past spring. They came in higher than we anticipated, fairly strong through the pandemic. We're hoping that continues. That's our third largest tax source. So there's some optimism in that segment of our tax sources. We're monitoring taxes every day. Our revenue analyst Sasha's running reports. We're looking to see where meals and sales and hotel taxes are recovering. And there's optimism there, but we still, again, we've made some assumptions already in our revenue projections about growth. So we'll continue to monitor them and to compare them to what we've already assumed. And then that's for the tax side that impacts schools. On the non-tax side, we still have other pressures, right, from fees and things as the local economy figures out parking meters and a lot of other revenues that support the county side of our general government, which is one of the reasons why we went with the constrained, debt service increases. How are we going to pay for it on our side? So we're happy to communicate with schools as we see information. We'll have real estate taxes are due here in the beginning of June. We're not as concerned on the collection side as we were this time last year. And as we move into the fall, personal property and business tangible taxes are our second largest tax source, and that comes in September and October. And so we'll have a good handle there as we start to develop both our 23 operating budgets for both sides and do the early planning for the 10-year CIP that we'll be discussing this time next year. I hope that's helpful in some way.
Oh, no, thank you. That was terrific. That was extremely informative. Thank you very much. I don't know that I got the bottom line about whether you all then are comfortable, and it's like it really is more for the county board then, based on everything you know, whether what we are doing makes you uncomfortable, because again, our CIP is going to you guys to approve as part of your CIP. And maybe that can be something that you all share. Sure. I see lots of comments are coming, so.
Yeah, so I know, Chair O'Grady, we're going to start with the school board, but I do see a couple of county board hands and folks leaning in. So I'm gonna see, and I don't, go ahead.
Lean in, please. I like the way this is going. Please.
Okay, so then, colleagues, I was focusing on the question, and so I don't know who was going first. I think it was Ms. Crystal, and then Mr. Dorsey or Mr. Carantonis. Ms. Crystal.
Well, I just wanted to say I really appreciate the candor of that question, and I wanted to try to answer in kind. I think you kind of put your finger on the pulse of what could be challenging about the CIP, and I'm really glad you asked it. So to respond with kind of similar earnestness, I think the thing that maybe does give me a little bit of heartburn when I think about sort of the mismatch of a CIP that is energetic and leans in, as you said, versus one that's kind of a bridge, or maybe I'll just phrase it in terms of the question, is about, whether and why it's necessary, and I think this is something that you and your colleagues could help shed light on us for us, is why it's necessary to fund the construction of the CIP or to put out a bond referendum for the Career Center. This next, as you know, Dr. Cannon, because we've been partners in trying to plan for this project, I'm really excited to see it go forward. I definitely support go forward and the planning go forward, but it also sort of seems to me from what I know that kind of the earliest a construction contract would be let would be after the time horizon of the 2022 referendum. So one of the things I'd love to just know about, I think that you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think the design is funded from previous CIPs and previous and so we could proceed with the design, and I'm really looking forward to supporting the school board in that however we can, and then talk about that construction money in context of a CIP that I hope kind of leans in for both county and schools facilities in 2022. So to sort of answer in earnest, but also tee up an opportunity for some discussion with you all, kind of helping us understand, why not put that big construction ask in the 2022 CIP update and referenda cycle.
Would we like to have Ms. Peterson answer that question? Because I think that the spreadsheet actually shows that that money for that project would actually come in at that time.
Yeah, Ms. O'Grady, I second what you said. If we could bring up the CIP again to share that detail, I think that'd be helpful.
I think it's on 32.
That page works as well.
Yes. So I can speak to it very briefly. As I said, the 21 referendum does not include any of the construction money, and the $185 million that is included for that Career Center project is in fact just a placeholder at this time. I know that the school board is looking to get a better estimate based on the new concept design in the next week. And so they will have a better idea of what this project could possibly cost at that time. But we are proceeding with design with the look at the new concept using prior bond funding. And so therefore we would not need construction funding until the 22 referendum. I think your question is more, why are we showing this cost in here now if we really don't need to put it into the 21 referendum and we can wait till the 22 referendum? And I believe that should be better answered by the school board, and I'll turn that back to Dr. Cannon.
Ms. O'Grady, you want me to provide some thoughts on that?
Sure.
I mean, Ms. Crystal, you know how we have had this project in the works for a while. We have been hoping to complete it by 2025. We have the seat need. The programs are there that have the needs for those facilities. And I think we really want to share with you all, with the community, that we are trying to keep this project on that timeline and have it come to completion. So it is in there as, and we are going to get the actual cost estimates. I believe we have a work session on Monday, and we're going to start really seeing how that plays out and whether anything needs to change to fit it in or how we're going to fit it in. But I think the bottom line is that it's been our top priority to complete the next, what is needed on that campus, and hopefully to provide a few more seats. And so we want to show that in our timeline. We want to play out the next several years and show that we can complete this project. But as Ms. Peterson pointed out, the bonding, the construction part of it would be in the next bond. So we've got a whole year really to plan if we need to adjust, new information, all those kinds of things, that will all be playing out over the course of this year. And then we'll really get this solidified in next year's 10-year CIP.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, just seeing hands, and then we'll go back to the school board. We'll just continue. We'll go to Mr. Dorsey next. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I too appreciate the clarity and bluntness of the question from Dr. Camden, and to answer in kind, because I really think it is the central question. You all need some clarity moving forward, whether we're receptive to this whole construct that you've proposed. I'll just say simply, I look at it in two different ways, so I apologize for this, but in terms of the overall issue of whether or not a CIP which exceeds your target and breaches our 10% limit on debt capacity, does that to me seem like something that is foolhardy in light of economic circumstances? I do not. I think we are looking at more of a V-shaped revenue recovery. All indications are that the Commonwealth and the region are already nearing pre-pandemic levels of economic activity. So I have comfort moving forward that our revenue assumptions are on the conservative side. Even without that, even if those don't bear fruit, the minor or the relatively low levels of increase above 10% that you are gives me confidence that on paper, we could figure it out with our overall investment strategy. However, for me, that's not the key determination as to whether or not what you're doing is wise. And for that, I need to ask you a question. Beyond the 10% limits, you have in fiscal 24 and 25 significant year-over-year increases in debt service. So can you give me a sense of how you're planning on affording that and what impact it's going to have on the overall request for transfer from the county or the impact on your own budget operations?
Dr. Cannon, would you like to answer that, or?
I was waiting to be directed there. Oh my goodness, you guys.
Feel free if you want to answer it. However, we perhaps go to Dr. Duran, or I can take a stab at it.
I mean, I can just start with something, and if anyone, Dr. Duran or anyone wants to chime in as well. I mean, absolutely, Mr. Dorsey, additional costs that are going to add to our annual budget are things that we have to be watchful of. We have a difficult budget. We, as you know, patched our budget this year with $40 million in one-time funds. We do, for the record, we just saw our third quarter closeout, and it looks like we're going to be able to replenish our reserves going forward, and that's at least a good sign, like you said, of recovery and such. It's going to be hard. We are going to have to continue to work on our budget and get back to that sustainable path. It's a priority for next year. It's perhaps a top priority for next year, and at least non-educational priority. And so, yeah, it's something that we're very focused on. We're going to work hard on. We're mindful of it, but we're also mindful that in the long run, we are continuing to grow. And again, we have this need. We have known we have this need. It is not a non-urgent need to provide the students the growing number of students who are being served on that campus with the appropriate facilities. So it's that typical tension we have. We have needs, we need to fund them, and we have to figure out as a school board how we're going to, put our budget together to do it all. And we will continue to talk to you all regularly about that challenge. And if staff, Dr. Duran or staff also want to weigh in.
So I'll, not seeing Dr. Duran just yet. I mean, I think that discussion and the set of questions helps clarify that the 10.31, the 10.2, and then the 10.4 in the out years, for my part, that doesn't keep me worried. I'm still thinking about, I'm sort of shorter term thinking about and most interested in where we can find space for the community high school, which seems like a even shorter than the fiscal 25 and 24 question. And so that's my 2 cents. But I'd certainly, the 4.66 and the 5.08 in debt service, I think, as both of you acknowledged, would be a concern, and we'll have to keep working on that. But I see Mr. Karantonis' hand, and there may be others on the school board side too. Go ahead, Mr. Karantonis.
Thank you, Mr. Differenti, and thank you for all the presentation and the work that is already going into all this. So very similar to Ms. Crystal and Mr. Dorsey, and for me to understand it correctly. So in fiscal year 22, on the bond funding column, so there are 16.6 million dollars appropriated for proposed to be appropriated for the Career Center, and 7.8 for major infrastructure improvements. They are in a white cell. So that means they are not part of a bond. To understand it correctly, this money exists already? Is it from pre-existing bonding?
If I might answer that. Yes, that is from prior bond funding, prior bond authorization that would be sold in that year. So we wanted to show that we have that authorization and that we would be selling those bonds, but they have already been authorized in prior referenda and are available to us.
So, and then these, to refer to the Career Center, this 16.6 in fiscal year 22 would pay for design and, for example, for the community, for the adult high school program as well. So is that part of the money that is needed to do these two things? Because the adult program should be relocated or reaccommodated by 2023, right?
By the fall of 2023, yes. But the funds that you see on the line there really are for design for the facility. And I will actually turn this over to Mr. Chambers to answer more in-depth questions about exactly how those funds would be used over the next couple of years.
Yes, good afternoon. In the short term, we would be working with regard to the community high school, providing, one moment, please. Sorry about that. We would be working with regard to a community high school and developing and finding a space for that. We have an outline ed spec that we had before. But we would have to find space, and we would have to design the improvements and do a lease and work through that. That's the first step that we must do for that project. With regard to the Career Center building itself, the first thing that we have to do, we're currently working off of an outline educational specification space plan that was based on the number of students that would be in the building. And we've developed that to create a square footage and a blocking plan that we can lay out so that we knew how big of a building so that we could get estimators to work on that. So our first step is going to then be taking that information that we have and reworking and rewriting the educational specification. And to keep this on track, as Ms. Cannon, Dr. Cannon showed us, she wants to keep it. We want to keep this on schedule. We need to keep moving into the design phase, and essentially we would be looking at working into a conceptual design by early in 2022. So we would, if the board was happy with the conceptual design and the pricing that we would get at that point in time, we would move forward into a schematic design, which we would not anticipate being completed until after the 2022, the 2023 CIP. So we really would only have design work until the next CIP. So, and we have that funding available. So I think that it does make sense, and we can revisit that at the next year at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Chambers. I mean, my observation here is that basically most of the risk is really with the career center and with major, infrastructure projects. The question about how hard we will be pushing beyond the 10% cap really has to do with how, good these estimates are. This is a risk question and this actually compounds to what Mr. Dorsey has pointed out. So that's a good answer for me for now, but I really am curious to see the numbers and the design work.
As are we.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Karantonis. I see Ms. Garvey, and go ahead, Ms. Garvey.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's been a good discussion, and I think, Dr. Cannon had a question for all of us, so I figured I would answer too. I am freezing. Can you hear me?
Yes,
we can.
You can hear me. I'm going to turn my camera off. I seem to be having connection issues, so let me know if you can't hear me. So let's see, on the heartburn question, no, and in part because I am very aware that a CIP it's basically a plan only for what you bond, and then after that it's it's really a plan, and things change, and so we'll be in possibly a very different place, and we'll work this through as we get there. So that doesn't give me a heartburn. The 10%, I think we can work that out. We may not even need to that much. It may all just kind of fall into place. So I'm very much for crossing bridges when we come to them, when it comes to this kind of thing. Then also the question about that Mr. Dorsey raised, which I think is a very good one, is thinking about your, can you handle the debt capacity? But that's, obviously for you to work through. And then finally, I would feel more comfortable is if at some point we do start hearing a little more about, I think what I keep, I'm a one note person sometimes at times, the schools of the 21st century, because, you're still, I think, working on design specs for, kind of the traditional high school a little bit more. And I think we're gradually getting away from that. But I am really hopeful that your virtual program that you're going to kind of pilot, it will be like a pilot. And that can be possibly start to inform how you design schools in the future, particularly for older students. I've had a discussion with a number of school board members. I do not know much about this, so I probably shouldn't float it, but just to show how out of the box I'm thinking sometimes. Apparently there's a brand new, beautiful high school in Falls Church City that has space, a lot of space. That's all there and built. Might there be some cooperation? Falls Church already sends students to the Career Center. So that's a possibility. And I know we've talked a little bit about the Crystal City Underground, and I know that's unusual as a space. But I think as you move forward into, again, a school of the 21st century, where I think particularly for older students, they're going to be out more, maybe taking classes at Virginia Tech, maybe taking classes at another local jurisdiction, maybe doing internships. That may change what you need. So the thing that gives me the most concern as we kind of go on year by year by year by year is I would like to start seeing some real sort of out of the box thinking about maybe changing how you're going to be delivering the curriculum, because I think that's needed. I could be wrong, but the more kind of thinking like that I see, the better I would feel. I'm not so anxious to just continue doing the same traditional thing over and over again, but I am not on the school board anymore. I'm well aware of that. So I just throw that out because you asked what gives us heartburn. So I thought I'd tell you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carvey. I don't know if Dr. Duran, go ahead. Or
Sure. So really, Ms. Carvey, it's really important for us as we think about that we have begun to tie more closely. And this year we've begun thinking about our IPP, our instructional program pathway, and thinking about what are the components that we want to see in our facilities and what is going to look differently. And virtual learning has been a part of that discussion this year. And as we think about the Career Center, which has very unique programs, as you know, having been on the board, what are some ways that we can be innovative in that approach? And we are considering that, and you're going to see very clearly as the plan develops further, a very tighter alignment, because the IPP process, the instruction should drive what we're trying to plan for. And that doesn't always happen perfectly that way, but that is definitely what we're moving to do. Our schools have been designed in ed specs for many years of how they've always been, right? But we have to shift that and change that to the type of learning that we know is going to be needed. We are looking forward next year to having a full 5-day virtual option for families that chose to be in that, because it will allow us to even further understand ways that we can better offer learning for our families. And only 5% of those who chose that option or so division-wide are looking at that. The large majority has been for health and safety reasons, but there is something that we've learned this year that students have learned better. Some students have learned better through virtual learning. And so how do we build that component in? And we have been actively involved in conversations and will continue to be with our university partners about the dual enrollment options and things of that nature. So you hit it right on the nail that this is got to be a part of our discussion, and it will be, and I'll continue to be deeper in our planning and articulate it even more so.
Thank you. That's great to hear. I think the pandemic may be helpful. You know, it was really difficult, but helpful. And then I will just posit that, you know, on our side, working with COG and working with our, you know, our commissions, I mean, somewhere we're sort of getting down to is hybrid. People don't want to go all virtual. People don't want to go. And I'm sure you're hearing that too. So that possibly that may be where we'll all end up, is hopefully the kind of the Goldilocks approach. But I really appreciate hearing that. Thank you, Dr. Duran. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Garvey. Ms. O'Grady, or Chair O'Grady, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. DiFerente. I just wanted to add in a little bit and respond to Ms. Garvey as well, because she brought up a very important point, which is about thinking for the future and what our students need for the future. And this CIP actually would invest in a building that would give our students more access to some of the more innovative opportunities, which include everything from engineering to technical skills to media and so many different animal sciences. And so this will give not only students who choose Arlington Tech more access, but also more access for our comprehensive high school students to come in and take classes that are offered at the Career Center. In addition to that, through this plan, we'll be looking at multiple pathways to student success by even offering the ability for our students, our younger students, to access this program as young as 6th grade. And so that's also some changes that we're making to ensure that our students are able to explore these opportunities in a greater way, even earlier. And one of the things that we've heard from some of our Arlington Tech parents is that this program seems to be working. For our most recent graduates, we have a student who has been accepted to Harvard. We have several students who have been accepted to Virginia Tech. So this program seems to be delivering. And this would give us the opportunity to be able to expand that access to those students who choose it as an option, and also for those students who are at our comprehensive high schools to allow more of them to access that sort of educational opportunity. So I wanted to share that. And just talking about the debt service, this would be a responsibility that the school board, and I won't be on the school board at that time, but they'll have to take a look at making a commitment to making this multiple pathways a priority for our students and for our community. And so they'll have to figure out how to balance the need for the debt service with other priorities. But we have to, I think, move in a direction at one point, because at this point we have 16 trailers on this campus. students who want to attend, success, and I think the need to ensure that we're giving multiple opportunities for our students to explore academic pathways. Thank you.
Thank you for that context, and that is the number of trailers when students are back is certainly a concern. I want to go to Mr. Karantonis, but I also, because I think you had a question along those lines. Before I do, I want to make sure that we cover, as we're coming to, through our discussion. First, I just wanted to provide, from my point of view, a little bit of thoughts on the kitchens and the HVAC systems, particularly HVAC systems, stand out as a direct, important response to COVID and the need for good systems that work. And the kitchens certainly with enough capacity to make sure that we're feeding. Those seem like great priorities, and just appreciate your sharing the CIP and those parts of this with you. I did want to also flag, maybe it's staff, maybe it's a combination of county and school staff, to sort of a little update on the process and the work that Mr. Chambers alluded to on the community high school. And then I do think we should at least try to sort of surface. I know there's been much discussion of the Heights project, and I would think it's appropriate to surface for our community that is something that we're continuing to work on. And I think that there's some need for staff to continue to assess projections for the cost of the different options that are there. But wanted to surface those three thoughts. And I now just see Mr. Karantonis, you can go ahead, but I also see Mr. Dorsey's hand if you are, if your thought has been passed.
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to ask one thing, because I've heard it from constituents, and it was mentioned also in the presentation. So there is concern about the need for, in the time frame that we're looking from 2022 to 2027, there is also concern about rising needs for schools in Pentagon City. It's along the Richmond highway. There is significant pipeline of residential development coming in, and it is going to be there in the middle of that period. So was that a thought? Was it deliberate not to consider that at all in the CIP planning, or is it just crowded out by higher priorities like the Career Center and et cetera?
I'd like to see if Dr. Duran staff might be interested in answering that question.
Ms. Stengel, do you think you can help with that, please? Thank you.
So Pentagon City is definitely on our radar, and every time I attend one of those planning meetings, I get very nervous about the number of housing units we see coming online. They are in the future, but what we're seeing is they're being more developed more aggressively. So things that are in our projections that are further down the line are coming earlier. We did not include it right now because we have enough elementary seats. However, our elementary seats are not where the development is going. We've overdeveloped Northwest Arlington, and we've underdeveloped in these areas of high growth. or we have a greater need in those areas. So we are going to need to do something there at some point, but not in this CIP.
Okay. I mean, I'm also mindful, Ms. Tangle, that new development comes also with a new rising economic level, so it can pay for at least a big part of this out of the box. Okay, thank you. That was my question.
If I could chime in on that, I live in Crystal City, so I'm experiencing all of this live and and I'm seeing more and more development that's coming up. I think the thing that we were trying to focus on in this particular CIP was really concentrating on our highest need items and items for which we already had a really concrete plan. As Ms. Stengel referred to, we are going to continue to look in collaboration with well to figure out what the right spot and location is going to be for future development. currently don't have something that we all agree upon that is the right place to put a potential school. And so given that uncertainty and the fact that the planning process is already underway, it seemed more feasible to really concentrate our efforts this time on things that are urgent, things that are concrete, things that we can really move forward and get the ball further down the field, as opposed to starting to unpack something that's going to be more complicated that will require additional planning. That being said, there's many thousands of new units that are going to be constructed in the buildings right nearby me over the next 5 to 6 years. And so it's going to be absolutely critical that we continue to talk about that, and will likely be more at the forefront in future CIPs, even as early as next year.
Thank you, Ms. Diaz-Torres. That really helps in that dialogue. So I think Mr. Dorsey is next, and then Ms. Crystal, but I'm also mindful school board members and Chair O'Grady jump in there. We don't want to go ahead, Mr. Dorsey first, then.
Thank you. I'm assuming it's open discussion, and I'll try to be brief, even though I have a number of questions. So specifically, it was Ms. Stengel and Ms. O'Grady, which asked about, a couple of key items that I just wanted to either opine or further discuss. One, Kenmore, and opportunities for county investments in the transportation network to facilitate building a greater capacity at Kenmore. While I certainly appreciate it from the standpoint of looking at that acreage and seeing growth opportunity, that butts up against the fact that there are a lot of real impediments to making systemic improvements, or really, quite frankly, adding travel lane capacity to South Carlin Springs Road. So another way to sort of deal with that is to think about whether or not there are accommodations in the operational use of the facility, which could, deal with the crunches on Carlin Springs, which are largely centered around the rush hours. So a question for APS is whether or not that is part of your planning, because I fear that you're probably not going to be able to fully utilize Kenmore if what you're waiting for are systemic improvements to South Carlin Springs Road in terms of travel lane capacity.
I will respond. We're not planning to use it in the near term. I do think that, when we look at our option schools and you think about where maybe, that might be a good location for that long term if we ever had to do something. Because I think when we were analyzing that site, it was looked at for high school seats and the traffic that you would get with high school students, many of whom drive to school, would be problematic. And yes, we've been looking at everything and sort of looking at through the lens of not only how close is it to the students who will attend, but then is there a different use of it? Those are not easy conversations with our families. So it's also something that we have to plan for as well.
Okay, I appreciate it. Probably on our side, I would say trying to figure out how we add travel lanes to South Carlin Springs is equally difficult. So that's why I asked. And if you'll indulge me, Mr. Chair, I'll just throw in one more and then yield the floor. Could there be a little bit greater specificity about the changes to the use permit process that were outlined as something that APS desired moving forward?
Mr. Chambers. Ms. Stengel? Okay, go ahead.
I will put this out there. Actually, as we met with county planners to give them a heads up on the Career Center meeting that happened just the night before releasing the CIP, the county planners suggested that we bring that to the table. And I will turn that now to Mr. Chambers.
There we go. I think that we've made great improvements and great strides. I think we went from an 86-page standard down to, I think it's like 36 pages. I think the issue is timing. I think it's hurt us on a couple of projects with regard to timing, which has added to cost. The Heights, for instance, we ended up delaying 3 months because the board wanted to hear it as part of the RAPS program. Those kinds of things. I think we really need to find a way to streamline it. I think it has benefit, for instance, on height, setback, and parking requirements are set during the use permit, and I think that's actually useful. because of the way the zoning ordinance was changed. And I think that has benefited. So I think there's positives and negatives to the use permit, but I think the biggest thing is the delays that it may cause. I think we need to somehow find a way that we can get through the commissions and get in front of the board, in a more timely fashion sometimes, because we literally sit on our hands kind of at that time waiting because we don't want to further develop the plan, the site plans and the building plans until we get through that use permit once we get there. So I think the point that we would like to try to make is to simplify that. We also just simplified the TDM and made it standard throughout all of our facilities, which you adopted at one of your last meetings, and we're in the process of implementing. So I think we're headed in the right direction. I think we want to keep going in that direction to make sure that we are able to utilize it as a benefit rather than as a detriment to our projects.
So just so I just want to be clear on what's actionable on our end, Mr. Chambers. So are we really looking at trying to streamline the period by which a project that has already gone through PFRC, BLPC, and is fully baked then goes through various county advisory commissions before reaching the board? Are we looking to condense that process, or are there other things that you would like to change?
I think that we should look at condensing the process. I think that we should also continue to look at the requirements and make sure that they are truly valid. For instance, TDM was essentially built upon business buildings, which is why we've modified it. And it makes more sense now, and it's more workable for APS in the long term and the short term. So I think that was beneficial. I think we just need to keep looking at the requirements, the standard undergrounding and those types of things. Undergrounding can add a huge cost to a project. And we need to be, I think, and the county has been. I mean, for instance, we found an extreme cost at the Cardinal building, and the county agreed that would be stricken from that use permit. We were not going to be required to do it there. So I think we just have to continue to look at those requirements, and as we work through them, to make sure that they make sense and are most appropriate for the community as well as the school and the county in general.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Mr. Chair.
Sure. I think, appreciate that dialogue. I know that there have, as far as the use permit process, there are processes that do apply to county facilities in addition to schools. And so wanted to share that thought. It's more one that the manager has made, but I think that the dialogue between the two of you kind of gets us to that continued need to be for flexibility and also to work through issues as they come up where there's merit and substance or where there's a need to be collaborative. So I see Ms. Crystal, your hand.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I wanted to follow up on a really interesting conversation that Mr. Carantonis and Ms. Diaz-Torres were just having about Crystal City, Pentagon City, and then of course the Lee Highway Plan too. And this came up a little bit in the presentation that we received from APS staff, and I appreciated it. And first, just want to start by saying a big thank you to APS staff, which have been, I know, very involved as actually staff members of those two study areas. And I think, as others alluded to, there's interesting work happening that I think is just made leaps and bounds over the past few years, which is continuing to be iterative, thinking about our long-range plans, how they will have an impact on student numbers, looking at the student generation factors from different forms of housing, and then using that to inform our planning and so forth. It's really iterative, it's exciting, and I know this has gotten to the level with the Pentagon City PDSP and Plan Lee Highway, where actually, my understanding is our staffs are working to look at the alternative land use scenarios being considered in both groups and what that would mean for student generation factors. So there is really positive stuff happening to make sure that we get those numbers right. I wanted to follow up on something from the presentation that was interesting. The ask specifically, I think, was ensure the Pentagon City Planning Study and Lee Highway Plan include defined spaces for APS schools. And so I wondered if you all could say a little more about what that means. Obviously, we're not able to, acquire property and then just not use it. And then, of course, the needs would differ dramatically, right? About whether we'd be citing, you will be looking to send an elementary school there versus a middle or high school, or choice program versus neighborhood schools and so forth. But tell us more about what that means and what you all have in mind with regard to kind of defined spaces. What would success look like in that measure when the PDSP and the Plan Lee Highway Plan are complete?
So I will start sitting on the Pentagon City Planning Study again. It's interesting because the study is a very confined area, but when you look just beyond it and and some of these things bring in the parks and some of the expansions there. I know the county manager probably a year and a half ago sent a letter to Cynthia Johnson when she was the interim superintendent that identified sites. If we came out of this Pentagon City Planning Study with that placeholder, I would hate to see something developed at that community center or wherever the school would fit on that, Virginia Highlands, Aurora Highlands area, without sort of, we could go to another site, that site or something better, just knowing that something's there, whatever the footprint is, then we might look at, can we fit an elementary, middle, or high school? I suspect in the area, we would only be able to fit elementary. So having something, and then maybe later on, if, by the time comes, there's a better spot, because of other things going on, that would be fine. But leaving this process and not having a plan, I think, we're hearing from parents in those communities. I've talked with the 22202 Civic Association leaders on several occasions. They're very concerned. They already are an area of high growth. They sit on the other side of 395 and are pretty isolated. Right now, everybody who lives in that Pentagon City area and in Crystal City takes a bus to Hoffman, Boston. We're creating a vibrant, walkable area, and everybody at every school level will likely be taking a school bus to their neighborhood school.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that insight. I loved the shout out actually for that list of a couple dozen different sites that the county manager and our planning staff generated to share with then acting Superintendent Johnson. I think that's such a helpful body of work because it is really reassuring to know that actually we have within our grasp dozens of different sites that we could consider together to meet the needs of our growing student population. We are not as bereft of options as sometimes our worst case scenarios model. One thought that I'll just maybe leave on the table, this could be for us as the boards or maybe a kind of a charge to our staffs. One of the things that I've seen kind of a dynamic that emerges is a little bit of this sort of chicken or egg scenario, right? Where school sort of rightfully says, well, we can't plan for what a facility would look like until we know where it could go. And we on the county side sort of say, well, we have no idea whether something would fit in a commercial building because we don't know whether this APS plans to site something there in the next 10 years, what its use would be and so forth. And so there's a little bit of this kind of chicken or egg dynamic, which I think is very understandable on both sides, but maybe does prevent us from seizing opportunities or reflecting back to the community, Ms. Stengel, as you pointed out, that there are plans in place. And so, maybe there is something of a protocol we can use to engage with one another, right? To say, these are the questions, a level of seriousness, right? APS is maybe ready to say that we have a level of seriousness about an elementary school in 22202 within the next 10 years, help us find sites. Whereas perhaps, we have hypothetically plans for likely needing a middle school on Lee Highway closer to 15 years time frame. Our level of seriousness is a little less, right? So that we actually know what to be thinking of in our planning processes. Since of course, it's not possible to just acquire and hold sites indefinitely. So I really appreciated that additional nuance. I think it gives me something to think about. And so maybe again, to just sort of surface, if there's a takeaway for us is how do we start to match up what our needs are and our seriousness about them so that we get out of that chicken or egg problem.
You may have stumped us momentarily, but I think it's a great question. I just don't. I'm
don't think it's going to be resolved in the next 14 minutes. I put it on the table for further discussion.
Sure, and it's helpful, but it is helpful to link back to the letter and then sort of stages. So we will have to come back to this for sure. I want to see if I can ask just one question. Maybe it's of our manager, but it's also Mr. Chambers touched on it. It is regarding the process for finding sites for the community high school, because I looked again, it's August 23, and I could use a refresher on how that would work, and mindful that the last 6 months vaccines and adjusting instructional program have occupied all of us, all 10 of us. So Mr. Manager, and it might be for Dr. Duran or his team in addition.
No, I would offer that in the past, when schools have come to us with requests like this, we have something the schools do not have. We have an entire bureau, a real estate bureau that is, constantly checking listings, and we have worked with schools, and we will partner in this particular case to see what kinds of opportunities are available. I know I've said this to Ms. O'Grady, and I'll just say it now, which is that people should not think it will be easy to find space along Columbia Pike. And I'll let, there are other board members on both boards who can speak to it, but, we have been stymied on multiple occasions trying to find space. And, the Pike is a vibrant corridor, and it's not going to be an easy thing to find the space you need for the period of time you need. So, I think that another question which we need to put out there is whether other places that are equally transportation rich would be eligible. I'm not saying that that's the guidance we're going to get, but I think that people should understand that, we've done a good job on Columbia Pike making it attractive. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. And so I see Ms. O'Grady, Chair O'Grady, and I also just, for my part, that will be my follow-up over the coming weeks, that I'll hope to just to hear a little more of a plan, even though this CIP over 3 years, before June 24th and before we adopt in July, I will be following up offline just to make sure that we have a process and there's some action steps. So we try to steer outside of the chicken or egg, analogy that Ms. Crystal just mentioned. So we can hold there. We're getting close to time. I do think just to signal for our school board members, two of the biggest items you've tailored a lot of the discussion in your CIP to immediate needs, and I will certainly be following up further on the Bluemont tennis facility, which I know has been in the queue for a long time, but is a significant expenditure. And then Metro is another big piece of our short term that I'll be following up and wanting to engage a little further with our staff on. But I think that leaves us just to any further questions. I do think it's worth looping back just one more time to point out that and surface that the heights, it's one of the slides that is discussed, two of the slides that is discussed, and that is something where we also have a good bit of work to do after today. But that's all I have. Over to Chair O'Grady and school board colleagues for any additional questions as we look towards wrapping up.
And I see that Mr. Dorsey has his hand raised, but before you recognize him, if I could just chime in. Thank you, Mr. DiFerente. We would appreciate any additional help to help us move forward in an expedited fashion to find a long-term home for Arlington Community High School. And appreciate what Mr. Schwartz says, that it may not be so easy. And I appreciate that. I've lived for 29 years along the Pike. And I appreciate its growth and its vibrancy, and having worked at one of the other bids in another section of town, I love it when a community can develop and do exactly what it's meant to do. So hopefully we can exhaust all opportunities to try to figure out a way to look at the Pike. And I know that we can do that better with your help. I wanted to just comment on what Ms. Crystal said earlier. I'm sorry, Ms. Crystal, I thought that was more of a rhetorical kind of, let's think about that as we move forward. And so I didn't jump back in, but I just want to say that I think we're going in the right direction. I can remember being on the South Arlington Working Group and working with that group, which was a large group. And at that time, we kind of went out of the box and we said, we need to be thinking about something in the Crystal City area for the community. And so we already put a pin in that a long time ago. Currently, we do have we will have an excess of elementary space. And so we have the ability with lots of tools in our toolbox to use to utilize different opportunities to be able to accommodate more immediate growth. But the point I think that you brought up, chicken or egg, we need to be looking at where the development is and planning for schools. And I think we've taken a big step to kind of get rid of the chicken or the egg situation by having Ms. Stengel on this committee. And so ensuring that we have the right people on the committees as we're having these conversations is a step in the right direction as we continue to do longer term planning and as we try to address our more current needs, which are laid out in this current CIP. So let's keep the conversation going. Let's ensure that we're collaborating. We have the right people on the right committees so that we can prepare for what's available in the future. And I think if we continue to do that, we'll be on the right path for ensuring that when children come into our system, we have the spaces to welcome them. So thank you.
Thank you, Chair O'Grady and Mr. Dorsey.
Thank you. Before I ask my final question, I would be remiss if I didn't thank the school board for what I see as really positive developments at the Career Center site. I sense a level of confidence in not only the building plan, but the instructional plan, as well as the funding plan, even though there's still a little bit more to be known on that. And a key point that you hit in your presentation, but I just wanted to underscore, your operational plan saves millions of dollars, perhaps tens of millions of dollars in needed reinvestment in the Henry building or the possible relocation off-site of the Montessori program. That's really, really significant and ought to be commended. To my last question, it's about Arlington Community High School. Is the help you need, primarily based on the whole notion that this would be a public facility site, or are you open to thinking about commercial opportunities that could include joint development or redevelopment with a private sector entity?
I'm going to let staff take a first stab at that. And then if necessary, I'll jump in.
Yeah, I'll jump into it with both feet, but I think that really, I think we've always talked about it or envisioned it from a facility standpoint, that it would be an office type space. It doesn't need the typical playground and all of that, the type of program that is there, as long as it can be customized to provide the spaces, the library, the snack area, the science and those types of facilities that program specifically needs, tailored to their needs. It does not need to be a school site. I think the most critical thing is access to transportation and convenient. Being in a developer's facility, office building, or co-located where the library may move in the future or whatever, I think we're open to all of those things. It's just a question of, what's the lease rate and how does that work, and is it the best thing or best location for our students?
Well, I'm actually very happy to hear that, because I think it expands the scope of what help is. It's beyond our real estate bureau. It's beyond CPHD. It also includes our Department of Economic Development, which could potentially identify some of those things that we just can't conceive of right now. So I'm glad to hear that that's something that you all will willingly entertain. Thank you.
That is a hopeful note, and I know that we all have ideas that we want to pursue, and the Career Center site certainly is very important to the county board in addition to the school board. But on that hopeful note, I also do want to just sort of underscore for the community that with respect to the heights, we want to find the cost of the different proposals, and that will be follow-up that I know as a staff level piece that we want to work on. And then just aware of how challenging and difficult this has been on the work that both boards do. If you're sitting at home, you're wondering, capital, we're just working on getting our kids into school and into the new flow of things. And certainly Teachers are exhausted, and our senior staff are exhausted, and maybe a few board members are exhausted. But that does not mean we don't have in our minds the long-term planning that we have to do while we're finishing out the work from the pandemic. So a big thank you to school board members for a job that is clearly one of the most difficult that I can imagine in Arlington right now. And that doesn't make the county board all easy. Thanks to Dr. Duran and the manager. And over to you, Chair O'Grady, for any closing thoughts, additional closing thoughts you might have.
I would also like to say that I don't think this has been an easy year for our colleagues on the county board as well. And we want to thank you for your leadership and your help for the whole community, but in particular as well for our community. In so many different ways you have supported us, and we want to thank you so much for doing that. I would like to give Dr. Duran an opportunity to say a closing remark really quickly, as I'm going to introduce him now a little better than I tossed to him earlier. So Dr. Duran, our Superintendent of Schools, please give closing comments.
Yes, thank you, Chair O'Grady, and thank you to everyone on the both boards for your partnership and your commitment. I heard from all of you your commitment to wanting to find the best path forward for our students and our community. And I hope that you saw in our proposed CIP that we did have that balance as well, of thinking about the community needs as well as our student needs, and finding, as Ms. Garvey said, also the best way forward, thinking about imagining our instruction differently, and what are ways that we can support our students differently. So I'm excited about the next steps. I know there's a lot of questions, a lot more information, and we're happy to, staff and I, work with any questions you may have as we move forward to this process. So thank you, and thank you to my colleague, Mr. Schwartz. We have a great relationship working together, and we're helpful in any of the presentation today as we brought forward through some of the information. It was helpful in having discussions with him about that as well. So thank you, Mr. Schwartz.
Well said, Dr. Duran. I don't know if Mr. Schwartz in 1 minute can come up with a pun, as he often does, but I do think, I know that there's a lot of goodwill, and we also have a lot of work to do over the coming weeks. And we thank our staff for doing that. And we also know that our community is looking to us to continue to work on the planning we need to make sure that we educate all students well and provide the facilities for our community. With that, I will pull out the gavel here, signing off and thanking all colleagues and staff. Good night, everybody. We're adjourned.
Thanks. Good night. Great to see everybody.
Good to see you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.